Is that it?
Perfect.
Not yet.
Lovely.
It is now, yeah. Well, that's good enough. Okay. Right, so I'm Stuart Haszeldine. I'm a geologist, as was stated. So I've spent my career working with real issues in and around the UK, whether those real issues might be coal extraction or oil and gas extraction or radioactive waste disposal. And the issue, I think, of the moment and the sustaining future for the next decades is whether we're going to try and survive as a species or not, and how we're going to handle the aggressive climate change, which I believe that we've created. And I'll talk this in terms of net zero, which is the ambition to keep emissions in balance with our amount of CO2 stored, and also to point out that we need to move beyond that. Net zero is just a milestone along the way. This is a faint image of the centre of the University of Edinburgh, what we call Old College in the University of Edinburgh, which is a mere 1750 or something like that. No, it must be, no, it must be older than that, must be 1740s. Anyway, this on the left, top window on the left, is the actual laboratory where Joseph Black discovered carbon dioxide for the first time in the world. So carbon dioxide was discovered in Edinburgh and named fixed air, and then donated to the world, I think, after that. Next slide, please. So we're going to think about why are we doing any of this? Because capturing CO2 and storing it is a big engineering enterprise which has never been done before. It is bound to be an interruption to our normal way of mining fossil fuel or extracting fossil fuel and burning it. Why should we bother? And of course, the answer is we're trying to move from an economy on the left, what we would regard as a Victorian economy, or even a Second World War economy founded on coal and fossil fuel combustion, to a much cleaner economy with blue skies, where if we carry on using fossil fuels, then we'll be capturing the carbon dioxide and putting that back underground at the same rate that we're extracting the carbon from the ground. Next slide, please. So the reasons why we're interested in this, of course, is because the effects of that climate change are now becoming apparent. So we've seen over the past couple of years that Arctic Russia area, the same size as Europe in Arctic Russia, is now starting to melt faster than ever before. So you're having large holes appear in the permafrost, oil tanks falling over into them, wildfires in the summer, central panel wildfires in California, all over the Californian forests, and of course Australia on the right. So we're losing a lot of biomass stock into the atmosphere. So the amount of biomass lost has been calculated at something like a third or even half of the fossil fuel emissions in the last year. I don't know whether I believe that or not, but there we are. And the other effects, of course, are rising sea level and warming of the ocean and acidification of the ocean. So that melting of ice will undoubtedly raise sea levels. Land ice falling into the ocean will raise sea level. That will drown coastal cities if we don't manage to stop that. That's a much bigger effect for humans than a little bit of warming. But the warming also affects the Arctic Ocean, and that picture in the center is the Arctic Ocean some 20, 30 years ago. And the Arctic Ocean in summer now is, in summer, ice is much smaller extent. And this winter may be the first time that ice does not fully reform in the Arctic. So that will be a first ever since the last glaciation, something like 15,000 years ago. And in the UK, we experience these climate change events as big rainfall. And so many parts of the UK have suffered or experienced lots of additional rain. I'm sure you've seen that in what I'd call the southern part of England, in Oxford. This is a picture of my local town where it was unaccustomed flooding. Next slide, please. So we can see the effects of all this. So why is that happening? Well, it's clearly from the climate modelling side, which I do not intend to go into, but it's clearly very, very plausibly linked to the ability of carbon dioxide as a molecule to absorb the heat, which is normally reflected from the surface of the Earth and reflected from the atmosphere back into space. that heat is being retained by absorption by that carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide derives from the fossil carbon predominantly, which we've mined very successfully since the early 1700s, first coal and then oil and methane gas. And I make the analogy with that is that it's rather like borrowing carbon from the carbon bank of underground. So we've mined this geological carbon, and so we've had a great lifestyle, feeding my lifestyle by borrowing more and more carbon from the underground. And that's increased our borrowing on the carbon credit card along that blue line. And we're now close to our total credit limit until the card company closes down our credit limit on that carbon credit card. And we're also experiencing some compulsory repayments because we haven't repaid any carbon debt back. So we're now experiencing the floodings, the hurricanes, the fires. And so that compulsory interest payment will continue and increase. So what we need to do as humans is we need to firstly reduce our expenditure on carbon, and I could regard that as becoming much more energy efficient, and that's the key first and most sensible thing to always do, but it seems to be one of the most difficult. So efficiency, using the existing energy more efficiency or getting the same energy benefit for less energy combustion is a clear thing to do. We can switch energy sources, moving to cleaner sources of energy, i.e. moving from coal to methane gas, which is still a high carbon fuel, and moving from methane gas to renewable energies. And then we can move to what I'll talk about for a lot of the rest of this presentation, is reducing our emissions by reducing the rate of emission, by capturing emissions from our fossil fuel use, and then also then repay the debt, which is trying to recapture some of the carbon already emitted, recapture some of that from the atmosphere and put that back underground. So it's important to remember this, that just emitting less doesn't pay off the debt. So if I've got a credit card and I've been borrowing £100 a month, then just going down to borrowing £80 a month doesn't do anything significant about paying off the debt. Next slide, please. So here's the real graph on the next slide, which is the United Nations Environment Programme graph. This on the left, on the main panel on the left, the grey-brown panel, shows you the amount of billions of tons of carbon dioxide emitted, 10 to the 9, 40 times 10 to the 9 tons we're at pretty much. The left-hand side is history, and the right-hand side is the future, the brown and moving into the green. And if we want to get down to a sustainable emission of carbon dioxide that's in balance with the natural ability of the Earth to recover the carbon dioxide through weathering and through dissolution in the ocean, we need to move down that black type of line. Okay, and you'll notice that that reduction of carbon dioxide towards 2100 has a steeper gradient than the rate of increase. So that means we need to decrease our carbon dioxide if net emission faster than we've increased it. And that's clearly proving very difficult. So even this year, when a lot of virus infection has closed down transport and movement and industry around the world, it's my understanding that the net emissions are still up, have increased in the world. So even if we have a 5 or 8% decrease in the world's emissions, that's still not going to be enough, and we need to do that year after year after year. And we'll, on the upper right panel is what that means in terms of different trading blocks. So we might think that the European Union has a nice smooth trajectory, so indeed it could plan a reduction towards 2050. Now that we've changed one president for another, we may have an opportunity to go brown with the USA and reduce USA emissions. But of course, China and India right now are still busy increasing, and new coal fuel power plants are still being built in East Africa and the Philippines. And so the amount of coal combusted is still incredibly negative on the bad side. So this is an unprecedented challenge, but we need to move down that black line, and you'll see that net zero, the point where the brown above the black line crosses the x-axis, the net zero is just a transient point of where the brown emissions balance the negative recaptured green emissions. And where we want to get to is to move through and past net zero, so we're persistently into net negative emissions to try and recover some emissions already emitted, which are in the atmosphere and ocean. And either of those are going to be really difficult. Next slide, please. So I talked about CO2 storage, and I just want to give a quick impression of what that means. It means capturing carbon dioxide and then putting that liquid carbon dioxide down a borehole deep underground. So it's not just putting carbon dioxide underneath the car park outside Blackwell's bookshop or anything. It's putting it maybe a kilometre, 4 kilometres deep underground. And that block diagram shows you a small power station on the surface of the Earth with some roads and some trucks. And then on the face, the southeast face facing towards you, you'll see two thin lines going down. That's two boreholes going deep down into the Earth, and the layers of rock are shown on that panel. And we're trying to go deep down into a layer of porous sandstone rock 3-4 kilometers down, which is the reservoir where we inject carbon dioxide, so that liquid carbon dioxide fills up the pore space, the tiny holes between the sand grains. So a sandstone like that would be like that one in the panel there, which is exposed and eroded in some United States desert. So it's like 100 meters thick, 300 feet perhaps or more, and then extends sideways for an area larger than the city of Oxford, more like Edinburgh or maybe Cambridge. Okay, so these are tens of kilometers across storage sites for carbon dioxide. And what we need for that carbon dioxide on the top right-hand panel is the carbon dioxide shown in white to be injected as a liquid. That pushes the water, which is in the rock. The blue water gets pushed out of the way between the orange sand grains. And that's trapped in there initially by layers of mudstone, silt, impermeable rock on the top, rather like slates on the roof of a house, but here stopping the carbon dioxide from floating up. And that physically traps the carbon dioxide initially, and the carbon dioxide then gradually, over a period of 100 years or 200 years, dissolves in that pore water underground and becomes unrecoverable after that time. It makes fizzy, salty water, rather like the sparkling water you may get out of a drinking bottle, but here salty, fizzy water in salty basin water deep underground. So that's one of the things we're trying to do, and I'm sure we can do that. I'm sure we can do that securely and safely, but I'll come back to that again with several of the technologies which we'll talk about. Next slide, please. And we know this is a global solution because the world has been effectively well surveyed for many years, many decades by the oil and gas industry, like it or not, but the oil and gas industry seeks similar pairings of rock with a porous reservoir which contains oil or gas overlain by an impermeable seal rock. And so the sedimentary basins where those accumulations of rocks occur are well known. And this is a map generated by several surveys looking around the world and portraying this is the number of billions of tons of storage in each coloured land area. So it's not a particularly accessible unit, but let's say we need 40 per year for the world, 40 of these billions of tons of units. So we can see that we've got many tens and very likely hundreds of years worth of storage capacity around the world. If that was exploited effectively, then we can inject thousands of billions of tons around the world of carbon dioxide back into the pore space. And
we seem to have lost Stuart. Can't hear you, Phil. We seem to have lost Stuart.
Let's give him a moment to see if the Wi-Fi recovers. I've been having difficulty with my Wi-Fi, but I think that's the children coming home and streaming.
So no change in the slides at my end.
Stuart, you've been...
Sorry, Stuart, we lost you there. Can you hear?
Yeah,
we lost you just at the end of that slide that's still showing, please.
Yep, so next slide. So we've got a very large amount of storage around the world. So if we can manage to make carbon capture and CO2 injection work, it can be a global solution for many hundreds of years in the future. So this has been done already, not for this explicit purpose, by injecting carbon dioxide since the 1970s on that top panel, showing 2 boreholes injecting the multicolored carbon dioxide in the center, sweeping through to dissolve out the oil in the rocks, because this is America and it's their right to extract as much oil as possible from the rocks underground. So we know how to handle carbon dioxide, how to inject it, how to pipeline it. And on the bottom panel is an example from the North Sea between the UK and Norway, where the Sleipner oil field has been exploited by Equinor, the Norwegian state company, and they bring oil plus carbon dioxide up those squiggly black lines to the oil rig offshore, separate out the natural carbon dioxide in that oil and inject that through that into that horizontal blue rock layer. So that's been injecting at 1 million tonnes a year since 1996. And that's exactly the type of process we know works very well. That's been replicated at other places in the world, on land and on sea. And we need to start building multiples of these, 30, 50, 100 of these for the North Sea. Okay, so the challenge is well known, it works, it's well understood. What we need is the ability and the financial profitability to make that work. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, this works around the world. Here's an example of a coal-fueled power plant in Canada, an experimental capture facility at the Boundary Dam coal plant in Saskatchewan. The power station has got those 4 red and white chimneys, and the capture unit is on the right, and that you can see that fills a substantial amount of the car park. So that's the first build of that. That came in at £140 a tonne for capture, transport and storage for carbon dioxide. But on the graphs underneath, you can see that if they go to a second example, they understand the engineering much better. So that would come down to $45 a tonne of carbon dioxide, American dollars, that will be. So these big equipment features get much cheaper if you build a series of them, like most engineering things. And on the right, carbon dioxide capture applied to separating hydrogen, what we'd call blue hydrogen in this country now, to make hydrogen at an oil refinery by splitting methane gas into carbon dioxide and hydrogen. And carbon dioxide is being extremely successfully captured from that as well. And that speaks to what we need to do in the UK to decarbonise heating systems, to separate hydrogen from methane and take away the carbon dioxide for burial, when we can use pure hydrogen in our gas heating in boilers in our houses. Next slide, please. So carbon capture and storage, we're probably all aware, has gone through a series of evolutions, particularly in the UK. Started off in the 1990s, thinking about carbon capture as a way of retrofitting onto existing coal-fueled power plant, or onto coal plant where we'd gasify the coal and split the carbon molecules into carbon dioxide and combustibles before combustion. So that's been done once, twice, 3 times now. And so that works, but it's clearly difficult, and it's economically challenging for a coal-fueled power plant to fit that equipment onto a coal-fueled power plant which may be 20, 30 or 40 years old. They'd rather wait and renew the whole power plant with a cleaner one if they get to rebuild it. Then we moved on around the 2015s. People started thinking about, well, if it's difficult on coal, we should also think about decarbonising gas combustion. So that's also been designed and is ready to run. Several pilot projects on that. And then starting to think much more extensively about industry, because industry in a country like, even as a country like the UK, as sparsely industrialized as the UK, something like 15–20% of our emissions are from industry, and those are produces very valuable products for us, not just electricity, but it produces cement or glass or paper or whiskey and beer in other cases. All those emit carbon dioxide. And in the past 2 or 3 years, people have now started to think about, down at the 2020, greenhouse gas recovery, GGR. And are we going to do that by nature-based solutions, by planting trees and blocking up peat bogs? Or are we going to seek technological solutions, which may be recapturing carbon dioxide from air, or BECCS, which is burning biomass and capturing the CO2 from that biomass combustion? And that lowest one there is what the present conversations are around amongst the researchers and the technology developers in the UK, trying to get some of those projects up and running in the next 2 or 3 years. But we can see that on the top right graph, all the talk and all the actions around the world have been spectacularly unsuccessful in reducing any carbon dioxide emissions, which are relentlessly trending upwards. Only in the European Union has carbon dioxide emission partly stabilized, and that's to some extent or a large extent due to closing of coal-fueled power plants and replacing coal, the switching from coal to gas I mentioned on the credit card slide. But in the UK, we've taken a slightly different track on the lower right, and in the UK, the government put, without great advertisement, put a carbon price on the fuel burned in power, to be burned in power stations, and that carbon price of a price support mechanism priced the carbon dioxide emission. And of course, the carbon dioxide emission from coal is twice per unit of electricity, is twice that from gas for the same unit of electricity. So that's part of the reason we've had a spectacular decrease of coal combustion in the UK, that black line there on the lower right graph. Parts were aging, were a bit decrepit, and either needed to be renewed or seriously terminated. So by putting that extra imposition as a large-scale tax nudge, the UK government has almost invisibly made it economically unfeasible to rebuild those coal plants for the future. So that's been a very successful and low-cost policy, but it's been done by a directed tax, okay, a very, very focused tax just on one piece, and we'll come back to that again later. Next slide, please. Next slide. So now the conversation in the UK is about industry, because we've got rid of the coal plants and we know we need to get rid of the gas plants, but gas combustion and industry are really, in some ways, two sides of a similar coin. And so the UK, since about 2018, 2017, has been talking about clean growth, about how to grow our industries in Britain and maintain industries in Britain, but yet greatly reduce the emissions of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases from those industries down to zero. So there's now what looks like quite serious amounts of money being allocated to the Industry Strategy Challenge Fund, 4.7 billion over 4 years. So that's up till about 2023, and defining several projects in the industrial areas of Britain, which are the web links in blue, Net Zero Tees Valley in northeast England, Humber in eastern England, northwest England and around Merseyside, South Wales and Scotland, and the eastern side of Scotland. And all of those different industrial areas are now bidding for shares of this £4.5 billion to deliver decarbonised industry and pervasively throughout the UK. And if that can happen, that will be a first in the world. Nobody's decarbonised, stopped the carbon emissions from a large industrial site ever before. And you can see on the air photograph, this is looking down obliquely at large industrial sites. These again spread over areas which may be 5 kilometres or 15 kilometres across in some cases. So they're not places you normally go for a holiday destination. So it's a slightly alien economy to many people, but these provide lots of the fundamental goods and services and the foundational industries of the UK. Next slide, please. So that's the ambition and the direction, and that's going to be attempted to be achieved by these 4 different methods. And again, efficiency and fuel switching on the top right is the first thing to try and do. Okay, trying to make better use of what we've got. So to move from oil-fired heating to gas-fueled heating. Then to move to maybe think about moving to electrification by moving from gas-fueled heating to virtually zero carbon power derived from renewable electricity. So there's a bit of a challenge about how to produce more and more renewable electricity. So we've produced quite a lot, but we're still nowhere near 100% renewable electricity in the UK. So I think last week we still switched on our coal plants again to produce 6% of our electricity. So although it's very attractive to many proponents, it's neither big enough nor reliable enough to rely entirely on renewable electrification at the present time, though that is very much the direction of travel. And then trying to decarbonize chemical energy, like I mentioned with the refinery in the United States, to split methane into hydrogen and carbon dioxide and send the hydrogen to be used in industrial sites, and also hydrogen to be used in domestic dwellings. And just yesterday, the Ofgem, the gas and electricity regulator, announced the funding for the first projects in the UK to provide 100% hydrogen to experimental sets of houses, 300 households. And then the last thing you would do, but the one which actually probably needs most advanced planning, is to capture the carbon. So all those other three actions of efficiency, fuel switching, electrification, and switching to hydrogen, if you like, all those are things which you might do before the method of last resort, which is capturing the carbon. But I say that's a measure of last resort, but you can't just switch on carbon capture and storage. You have to plan to develop that, and that takes at least 5 years of planning, and maybe in some case, and 5 years before that to identify the storage sites of the geological underground. So there's a very long lead-in time on that. So if we started planning a whole new project now in the UK, we'd actually gain 5 years over the rest of the world because we know where our storage is, but we'd still probably spend 2 years investigating storage, and then we'd spend another 5 years designing and building and installing the equipment. So we wouldn't get that working until the very late 2020s. Next slide, please. So these are big operations which are complex and experimental, but have good confidence that those can be done. But the challenge is, how are we going to make a business out of it? Okay, and I'll come back to that. On the left here is showing you those industrial areas on a map with the circles roughly the size of the carbon dioxide emissions at the present day. On the right is showing you in simplistic language the locations of storage sites deep beneath the North Sea, deep beneath the Irish Sea, and deep beneath the southern part of the North Sea offshore of East Anglia. So again, we've got good spatial, very close spatial connectivity between our sites of CO2 needing to be captured and our sites of CO2 storage. And again, I'm listing the types of money being directed towards that by the UK government just now, and 800 million for carbon capture and storage infrastructure specifically, up till 2 weeks ago when the Prime Minister announced his 10-point plan and decided to put another £200 million into carbon capture and storage pipeline infrastructure and capture. We haven't quite discovered what the catch is yet, but it's seldom that you get anything for nothing. I'm sure there's a catch somewhere, but you'll also notice on the bottom line there that in that same speech was announced £100 million for direct air capture, which greenhouse gas recovery and air capture. So this is for the first time the UK starting to undertake research, but very, very much linked to commercial development with this funding, linked to commercial development of that direct air capture. Next slide, please. So these are the types of air capture which are built to run as a pilot level. In British Columbia, a company called Carbon Engineering has got a shed up to the head of a fjord up at the north end of British Columbia, and they have built a set of equipment which sucks in air, normal air, with a large fan through the very small blue shed in the center of that space with a large shadow behind it. That's got a fan on the top of it, and the air contacts there to potassium hydroxide, which absorbs the carbon dioxide from air, and that goes around, regenerates the potassium carbonate back into potassium hydroxide in the central square there, and swaps that over with calcium to produce calcium carbonate as an end product. So that then can be regenerated, and the CO2 can be taken away and either put back underground or carbon dioxide can be used as a feedstock to make artificial fuel, to make artificial hydrocarbon, using the carbon out of that, to really use that carbon, starting to think about that, if you like, as a circular economy. So this exists, this type of direct air capture exists, but this is still at a pilot scale. Some assessments put the cost of that at $600 a tonne of carbon dioxide, so that's substantially more than that carbon capture enterprise I talked about in Canada, or the hydrogen cleanup in Texas at the refinery. But the company developers, ever optimistic as most company developers are, put the price of this at probably around £200 a tonne of carbon dioxide. And there are 2 or 3 other companies in the world doing this, and they've all now converged on the £200 a tonne, $200 a tonne, I should say, American tonne for carbon dioxide capture from air, which is interesting because that puts that price in contention with the other types of carbon capture and storage actions I've just talked about. So they can all compete on relatively equal playing fields regarding price. Next slide, please.
We've lost Stuart again. Just wait a moment, it might come back as it did the last time.
Yeah, in the meantime, a reminder that you can post your questions in the chat. Matthew Williamson has done so we'll put those to Stuart when we get to the end, and I hope we'll hear him again shortly. Right,
there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, we lost you, Stuart, just at the start of the nature-based forest.
That's great. Okay, so of course it is very possible to capture carbon dioxide from the air by natural means, by using nature as your assistant and as your helper. And so there's a huge move in the past 2 or 3 years to plant additional trees and reforest areas which have been recently felled, but also to reforest areas which have been depleted of trees hundreds or even thousands of years ago, like in most of England and Ireland and Scotland. And so this is perfectly viable, and that is accessible in price. That can be a low enough price. But the problem is, for me, that this has lots and lots of side benefits in regenerating ecosystems and providing pleasant places to be and good uses of the land. But the problem is the huge tonnage of CO2 which is required to match 40 billion tonnes a year of fossil fuel emissions. So this needs to be done on a huge scale if this was to become a global system. And the simple types of analog are that each European needs 3 full-size football fields planted with trees rotating throughout their entire lifetime. So each of us have to have that much land area dedicated to us, and there clearly is not the land area in the UK to be self-sufficient in doing that. We'd have to ask other countries to do that, or in a different way of thinking, to colonize other countries' land space to clear up our emissions. And then the second type of problem I have with this is that we need to store carbon dioxide for many, many hundreds of years, in fact, at least 1,000 years, and from the climate modelling, 10,000 years. So that's the equivalent amount of time since the last ice age is the amount of time we need to store the carbon. So growing trees is terrific and will undoubtedly absorb carbon dioxide, but after 40 years or 100 years when the tree is grown, then I'm slightly stuck with how to store that carbon and preserve that carbon from being oxidized, because I need to store that carbon for another 900 years to between 9,000 and 900 years. So the maintenance of this type of nature-based solution is difficult in the required timescales, and I think it's important to try and analyze the numerical and factual evidence for that. Next slide, please. So what else can we do? Well, there are companies which are doing air capture by recapturing atmospheric carbon and putting it into aggregate. So here's an example from the University of Greenwich. That's got 3 UK plants, £15 million turnover. It makes lumps of artificial limestone, which can go into concrete aggregates. So that works, and that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere And again, that's carbon dioxide in those minerals. Making a solid mineral has a very, very long lifetime. That has tens of thousands, maybe even millions of years of lifetime, and can be done at an accessible price. So not all solutions are large-scale carbon capture and burial, but equally scaling this up again to be a global industry has been persistently slow and difficult. Next slide. So we've talked about the opportunities. So what about some of the hazards? Next slide. And we know that, again, I just talked about the size scale. You know, one aggregate making plant or 3 aggregate making plants in the UK doesn't solve our climate problem. I think if we go back one, but and just to illustrate that with soil, so it's quite possible to recarbonize soil by putting biochar into soil or by tilling soil and working agricultural soils in a different way. And there are a huge range of estimates for how much carbon you could store, how many billions of tons of carbon you could store in a year. And these sort of are around 2 billion tons, maybe 4, 6 if you're really lucky. But again, compare that with our target of 40 billion tons a year. Even though this could be relatively low cost, it in itself is not sufficient. So what I'm trying to paint here is a picture that there is no unique solution. There are many solutions. They all can have and should have a role. They're going to come in at different prices, but actually getting this done fast. Remember the graph, which the black line decreases very quickly. We need to do all of these as fast as possible to keep our carbon down, our carbon emissions decreased as fast as possible. Next slide, please. We think about this in terms of conventional carbon capture and storage on coal-fueled power plant. So the size of the challenge is 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year from coal-fueled power plant. That's the blue circle. And if you're a very good eyesight on the northwest of that circle, you'll see where we are at the moment with the demonstrator plants like the one in Boundary Dam in Canada. That's what's actually happening at the moment. So we need to get, if this is to work, we need to get from the small blue dot to the big blue dot by 2050. So that's really in the quite difficult category. And no amount of enthusiasm and warm words from politicians is going to make companies build lots of new power plant to do that. It's either going to have to be mandated, i.e. dictated and forced by legislation and law, or it's going to have to be priced that everybody chases after the money to make money out of capturing CO2. So we have to change our pricing and business system to make throwing away CO2 to be penalized, whereas capturing and storing CO2 has to be made profitable. Next slide, please. Of course, the more we build, the cheaper it gets. I illustrated that by the Boundary Dam power plant. Here's a plot of carbon capture and storage on coal-fueled power plant from 2008 or so up till the future. And of course, only a few of those have been built. Okay, so the red ones have been built. You might regard some of those as outliers, and that's fine. But nonetheless, there is a clear trend of optimism in reducing the theoretical cost of CO2 capture per tonne. And because so many companies from so many different countries are coming to a similar result, including designs in the UK, then I guess there's reasons to be optimistic. So that if we built new coal-fueled power plants, or rather China and Australia built new coal-fueled power plants, then we should be able to operate those with greatly reduced emissions. But again, that in itself is not enough. Next slide, please. The other type of feature I want to point out is I mentioned the amount of storage you need, and the amount of storage you need takes a little while to develop. So this is a graph with much greater complexity on it. Unfortunately, I can't point to it at the moment, but on the right is the panel showing you where the storage sites are. That's fine. Thank you. Yep. And then on the left is the big shaded graph, which shows you the amount of greenhouse gases in Europe on the vertical axis through calendar years on the right, heading towards our European goal for zero carbon effectively by 2050. And the circles, like the full moons, show you the amount of storage needed every year to be developed. That's great. And so we're at 1 or 2 million tonnes a year with those demonstration boreholes at the Sleipner field I showed you a little while ago, and that needs to scale up and scale up and scale up. And that looks like a big challenge, and indeed it is a big challenge. But if the price is right, that is almost exactly the type of scale up which the oil industry did from the 1970s through till 2000s, over a 20-year period when the present oil industry developed the North Sea. That was a very, very similar scale up. So that amount of technology can be done. There just needs to be a profit at the end of the rainbow to attract in big companies who are going to make big investments to do big engineering projects, which is what we need if we're going to solve these problems. Next slide, please. Okay, so utilization, I've mentioned about using CO2 to make fuel or using CO2 to make aggregate. That is this graph's by Cameron Hepburn from Oxford and several associates in Nature, so it's reliable. And but you can see the cost profile of large amounts of billions of tons utilized on the right hand side of this graph. Now, several things are very good and profitable, which are the coloured bits on the left there, labelled biochar, enhanced oil recovery, methanol. Now, not all of those, of course, store CO2 for the long term. They're ways of using CO2 to make something which people will buy. So if I make methanol and then use that as antifreeze on my windscreen of my car, or if I choose to put that into vodka or something, then the methanol carbon just gets released. It's not stored. So two things to point out is that utilization is done for profit, not done for carbon storage. And most utilization, a lot of utilization can turn a profit, so it's very attractive, but we have to realize that it's not carbon storage. But the blue line I've superimposed is the interesting dilemma which is approaching us, that we could utilize lots of carbon in the gray bars on the right, saying microalgae, methane, Fischer-Tropsch, turning them back into fuels. But that uses lots of money and lots of energy. And actually, it's much cheaper to put a price ceiling on all that with direct air capture at around $200 a tonne, to say once we get up to the cost of that price ceiling, then everybody should and would be doing direct air capture and putting their carbon dioxide back in the ground and not indulging in recycling carbon through the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So what we need to do is sort out how to get paid. And three things you need to do to get paid. It has to be legal. You need to know how much it costs so you can charge the appropriate amount for it. So we know we've made it legal in Britain. We've got a good idea of how much it costs, but you need somebody to buy and somebody to sell. So you need a market and you need to get paid for doing it. And that's where the UK has serially failed in the past 20 years to do this. There's a lot more conversation about that now, but I'll just point out some of the dilemmas. Next slide, please. So it's the job of the civil service to be fair and rigorous in Britain. So being fair and rigorous, the UK civil service has worked out different methods of paying for carbon capture and storage. And there are 5 blue methods there of different types of paying for it. And the way that conversations, which are ongoing now, the way those conversations are headed, there may be 10 different methods, one for each industry or one for each subset of industry. And so each of those have risks and problems, which also basically can be summarized as who's going to pay for this. Okay, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next couple of slides, but I'm going to contrast those with the green method, which is something I'll propose as a research, as an idea which is not yet developed as a commercial proposition, but is simpler. So let's have a look at the blue methods. Next slide, please. And the main blue method is pricing of emissions. So focusing on CO2 emissions from an activity, then the emissions trading scheme, which was developed first deployed first in Europe, and has then infected the rest of the world, large part of the rest of the world, is that each activity has a cap of emission in the lower right, those two balloons saying cap on the left there. Each activity, like a factory or something, has an amount of emissions they're allowed to have, and they're given some emission certificates mainly. If they don't use all their emission certificates. So if they've become more efficient, then they can sell their certificates into the market. And some other person on the top left there with its emissions going outside bigger than its cap has to buy those certificates and pay money for them to allow them to emit more than they're allowed. So there's a trading in emissions in pieces of paper allowing you to emit. But I'll argue that all of this is just allowing you to carry on behaving badly. Okay, so you're just buying permissions to pollute and carry on polluting. None of this actually tells you to store and capture any carbon dioxide. All you've got to do is come within your cap or find a way of buying certificates at a cheap price to allow you to carry on behaving as you've done before. And so there's a philosophical problem about how that pricing gradually drives down CO2 emissions. And of course, the market people, the conventional economics says that the cap reduces every year and every year and every year, so that the amount of certificates reduce in number each year, so that they get more and more expensive to buy what you need to carry on behaving badly. But that's really not worked. So here's the graph on the right, compiled by The Economist, so it must be true, of the carbon price per tonne of carbon dioxide in Europe from 2008 up until May 2020. And you can see two things. Firstly, that the price has been spectacularly low at $10–15 a tonne, euros a tonne for most of that time. The price went up to close to 29 euros a tonne and then has collapsed down to 15. So firstly, the price is too low to build and to reliably run any carbon capture equipment at all. That price is way lower than the $40 or even $10 a tonne I was talking about for planting trees. So the price is way too low. And secondly, the price is catastrophically unreliable. If you went to a bank and said, I want to borrow money to buy a house and here's my income, they would laugh at you and tell you to walk out the door because that's not a reliable income. So this is not a bankable proposition for any serious industry. So what this is doing is trying to treat the symptoms of emissions rather than vaccinating us to tackle the causes of the emissions. And we'll talk about how to tackle the causes now. Next slide, please. So we can either all take communal responsibility for our own emissions and say that the polluter pays and we are the polluters and we have to be very guilty about it. So that's 9 billion consumers around the world have to join in to a carbon market so at some stage or another. Or we say that since the history of carbon extraction of fossil carbon, 90 companies in the world are responsible for all that. And right now, there's probably about 30 to 50 organizations around the world are responsible for extracting the oil, gas and coal, which is contributing to the carbon emissions problem. And some of those are household names like BP and Shell and Exxon, Chevron, but that's because we live in Europe. But actually nowadays, most of the fossil carbon production is done by state oil companies, whether that's Equinor in Norway or whether that's done by Saudi Aramco or the 3 Chinese state oil companies. So we have to find a way of influencing those people. So what if we don't think about taxing and we don't think about consumers as being to blame? Next slide. What if we think about putting the blame on the suppliers of the problem? And so that if companies supply carbon into our economy, then they get given a certificate of obligation to store some of the consequences of that supply. So it's a bit like if you provide me with tobacco and cigarettes, then you should pay some penalty or some sort of financial obligation to clean up the effects of those cigarettes, whether that's ill health or death or whatever. So here we're proposing, and that's work we've done with myself, but a concept, a variant of that originated by Miles Allen in Oxford, and still working on this, trying to get it to be taken up. So with each tonne of carbon that gets either produced in the North Sea or surroundings around the UK or gets imported, each tonne of carbon is given a certificate of obligation by the UK government. And that certificate of obligation means they have to store a percentage of that tonne as mandated by the government. So this is a mandate system. But the mandate doesn't say store it for $5 a tonne. The mandate just says store it. and you, oil company, discover the price it takes to store it. And yes, you, oil company or coal company, will pass that on to us, but that will be the wholesale price of the cleanup of the fuel we're using. So it's actually embedding the cleanup in the price of the original fuel with this certificate. Next slide, please. So to show you how that might work as a system, what we need on the left there, Houses of Parliament outline, is a simple statement saying that companies will contribute to the cleanup of their carbon products. That creates the certificate of obligation, which is awarded to every tonne of carbon. That requires minimal government civil service activity because we know where all those tonnes are imported and produced right now, so we have all the records of that. That is the obligation to take back some carbon, the take-back obligation, which passes to the oil company with the derrick there. The oil company with the derrick passes that on, that obligation price on, to the industry producing the stuff on the right-hand centre side, the east side of the diagram. We all pay a bit more for our products produced by the industry because that price of that carbon cleanup's included in the gas heating or the fuel or the energy use of that industry. We all pay a little bit more for those products, and that's what pays the industry to pay a little bit more to the oil company for the raw fuel. And then that enables the oil company, of course, to find the cheapest, secure way of storing that carbon vertically down in the storage site at the bottom at 6 p.m. on the diagram. Okay, so the funding is a minimal extra payment paid by everybody who uses any products using fossil carbon. And of course, once that's stored, on the southwest of the diagram, a certificate of verification, a certificate of storage is awarded, and that cancels out the obligation. So this works by saying, okay, in 2025, we want you to store 1% of the carbon imported. In 2027, we want you to store 5% of the carbon imported and unproduced. In 2030, we want you to store 15 or 20%. And by 2050, sure, we are heading for at least 100% of the carbon imported. And the carbon stored can be derived, of course, from capturing carbon dioxide at sites of emissions, but can also be derived by building direct air capture plants to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So we know that the ceiling price, the maximum price on the carbon captured, will be the price of the air capture, will be that $200 per tonne. So this becomes a very reliable, closed-ended delivery mechanism where there's a clear pathway to what you want with a clear maximum price exposure and a clear mandate for each year of the journey along the way. The great advantage is this is simple, it's quick, it's very direct, it's very reliable, it requires very, very few civil servants, and most of all, there's no tax charged, so that whoever's in the Treasury can't charge you a tax with one hand and steal it with the other hand, which is what happens at the moment, because of course we've been charging tax on the hydrocarbons produced from the North Sea since 1970. We've been charging 80 to 90% of tax on every barrel of oil that's produced, and approximately zero of that has gone into climate remediation. So the government takes all that as revenue. Here with no tax, there's no revenue, there's just an activity, and the companies have to sort that out. Next slide, please. So to finish off, just an example of a project which is, next slide, please, which is starting. There are several projects around the UK. I'm just going to choose this one, the Acorn project in northeast Scotland. Here on the top left is a diagram in the green lines of what a pipeline network might look like in 2050, bringing CO2 from Europe, bringing CO2 from the UK. On the top right, the green diagram shows you what the first project will look like. Pipeline from central Scotland, a pre-existing pipeline, reusing an oil and gas pipeline, saving money, saving energy, saving resources, taking carbon dioxide up to the northeast coast and sending that carbon dioxide to be stored in that orange manta ray offshore, which is a thick sandstone with enough storage for 100 or so years. And this project can also then import CO2 by shipping from other ports around Europe, from Netherlands or from Humberside or from South Wales, so we can store other UK CO2 in this same development. And this same project also proposes to build a direct air capture plant so it can then benefit from the emerging market in transferring and trying to have CO2 available to store. Next slide. And so to finish off, so that's a real project, the Acorn project. Next slide. To finish off, what I've said is that pricing CO2 on, well, developing storage is essential. CO2 emissions markets are a low price, unbankable, very slow. They've had 10, 15 years to get anywhere and they haven't got anywhere at all. And they cannot philosophically reach net zero. Greenhouse gas recovery is emerging as a thing. There are demonstrators globally. There are activities in the UK which can do that, but that's just starting on its replication and learning curve. And there will be a contest between nature-based solutions and direct air capture. But the mathematics, the arithmetic of it is that you need all of that, not one or the other. All of those should be winners. The UK can capture and store all this CO2. It needs regulation. We've done that. It needs business models. We're busy trying to do that, but it hasn't got a clear method of payment which can take us anywhere near towards net zero. So we propose that carbon take-back obligation as a simple and radical way of putting the responsibility back on the suppliers. And remember, from serial analysis of this from the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, this is not actually expensive. This is 1% or 2% of gross domestic product for any advanced industrial society. So that's, let's say, the cost you spend on Christmas Day, then just create another Christmas Day in the year, and that cost is what it's going to take to clean up the climate. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Stuart. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful journey through, well, obviously lots of experience in this field. And I especially liked your introduction that this is not just about, you know, reducing our expenditure, but actually paying back some debt that we need to do. And I was also quite encouraged by the scale up that you've shown, that, you know, in the North Sea, we've done similar things like that. And I thought you teed us up for a discussion about legislation or price-based instruments. So you've come down very clearly on that. That's good to see, and I'm sure we'll have questions and discussions.
I can see that Nick's going to disagree with that. I haven't read any of the chat, I'm afraid, so it's up to you.
So let's go through the questions in order. I've seen them all; they're all excellent. So let's start with Matthew Williamson and then work our way down to Nick with his question about auctions. Matthew, do you want to turn on your camera and microphone?
All right, I can actually do a slider on this.
Are you there? We can't hear you yet, in case your microphone is muted.
I can actually see the questions. All right, Matthew, if you want to ask, yep, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I am here. I just wanted to ask, setting aside the rest of the world and what they need to do to get to reach the targets, do you think the BEIS's funding goes far enough? And the one I'm aware of is the Zero Carbon Humber initiative, the BECS carbon capture initiative. Do you think that's the most effective way to set the UK on the right path?
Yeah, okay, so there's 2 or 3 questions embedded in there. So the first simple answer is no, that 4 or 6 billion, whatever it is nowhere near enough to build the equipment for the UK. And so it will take several times that. And of course, that sounds like a lot of money because it is. But remember, this is a commercial business. And if I compare that with the cost of building a coal-fueled power station, that's probably £2 billion. If I compare that with building a proposed Hinkley Point nuclear-fueled power station in southwest England, that's, I can't remember, but it's probably more like 15 or 20 billion pounds. So the actual amount of money, in a way, is not terribly important because we know we can borrow infinite amounts of money if we're going to make a profit or if we're going to be reliable refunders of the money, because we're just busy doing that at the moment. So it's, can you make a profit out of borrowing that is the important bit. And I think what the government are doing, the UK government are doing, is trying to nudge people, the companies, by that I mean nudge companies into investing by saying that we want you to go this way. This is the way the analysis says we should go, and to show that we're confident, we're going to share part of the cost with you. And that has 2 messages. Firstly, that the government's actually going to invest its own money. And so that's always good when somebody's invested their own money. That gives you confidence that they are going to pay attention to this, because they might lose their money as well as you losing yours. And then the second consequence is these first of a kind projects are often more expensive than the subsequent ones. And I showed you that a little bit with the Boundary Dam project, how the follow-on project might be $45 a tonne for capture rather than $140 a tonne. So that by investing, giving a grant effectively to the very first projects, that the overall cost of that is reduced down to something the company can manage. So the company is co-funding that, co-venturing, sponsoring it with the government, but the company is paying out the same amount of money as it would do if it had built the second or third or fourth one. So it makes it accessible for them and their shareholders. Because remember, companies are not charities. Their job is to make money for their shareholders in this strange system we've invented. And so they can't just speculate because it's a nice thing to do. They have to invest because it's likely to show an advantage in the timescale of that investment. Is the Zero Carbon Humber initiative the most effective way to do that? And you've said BECCS, biomass CCS in your question. So the Zero Carbon Humber, though, has two parts to it. There's a hydrogen generating part by Equinor, Norwegian oil and gas company, who are interested in generating large amounts of hydrogen in the Humber and capturing the carbon dioxide, because that's where their gas pipe comes onshore, because we use most of the Norwegian gas exports are piped to Britain. So that's where they can develop their hydrogen. And then the BECCS part is to be developed with the Drax power station, which burns biomass but does not capture the emissions. So if BECCS biomass capture can be developed and done, then that could be viable. But I have two problems with the BECCS proposition at Drax. Firstly is the experiment is tiny at the moment. It's in a standard container, like the containers you get on the backs of articulated lorries. So it needs scale up by about 100 or 1,000 times, which is really unlikely in the time scale needed. And secondly, even if you did that, what we're doing with that power station is we're raiding the rest of the world for cheap biomass to come and burn in the UK, when we should be actually becoming more self-sufficient rather than relying on a financial colonization of paying people to mow down their trees for us. We should be generating our own fuels and our own systems of generating our energy, in my opinion.
Well, that was a beautifully detailed answer, Stuart. Just to warn you, we've got questions flooding in.
Oh, right. OK, go faster then. Right.
Since you already touched on.
Right. Steve says CO2 in Wales not close to any storage sites. Is that a deal breaker? No, shipping of CO2 is totally viable from South Wales. Shell are the company involved in designing shipping for that project. There are about 3 or 4 different companies in Norway who can and do CO2 shipping. CO2 shipping already exists from the Yara fertilizer plant into the UK, because they provide CO2 for our beer and fizzy drinks. So yes, CO2 is a viable shipping option.
Gavin, do you want to ask a question directly to Stuart? This is about the energy cost.
I can. Stuart seems to be very good at reading. Thanks for a great talk, Stuart. 2 quick questions. Can you give us some idea of the capture efficiencies of the different technologies, and also the energy balances? How much energy is required for the different technical options, please?
Yeah, OK.
Ability to read. I just like the idea of you talking to each other.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's that's part of being live, isn't it? Rather than just a recording. So the capture efficiencies, well, you in these ones, these very big ones like power plants that I've talked about, then the usual, whether it's coal or whether it's gas, then you lose something like 20% of the energy by having to regenerate the solvent. So the CO2 is captured with a chemical solvent, and that goes round a loop and is then reheated to drive off the carbon dioxide, and that regenerated solvent goes round again. So that's where you lose a lot of energy. There's clearly and perennially lots of very terrific academic work going on, developing new solvents, developing new capture methods with membranes or with solid state porous material, and undoubtedly those will come in. But because the companies have built these projects at the moment want to use something which is already established and known as a solvent, so they don't take any risk on that, they've gone to use the established amine solvents, which are actually really 30 or 40 years old in terms of their technology. So there's a lot of scope for greatly improving that and reducing the energy penalty and therefore the cost of that capture method. And you'll see that I briefly explained the direct air capture with carbon engineering, which is using potassium hydroxide and then calcium hydroxide to capture and transfer the CO2. And those solvents go around the loop, but the calcium carbonate, of course, needs reheating to regenerate that as a material. So that still uses energy. And I think it's important to say that those air capture methods, which are, I haven't gone into all the companies, which the air capture methods which are presently being proposed do use a huge amount of energy. So it's, in simple terms, it's roughly, half a kilowatt for every kilowatt of energy originally provided. So they're going to be huge drains on the energy system if we develop those. But again, I come to the point that they're a way of capping the price and understanding the reliability of CO2 capture in a country. So it's a way of developing a reliable CO2 management system. And all we're really arguing about there is if we build lots and lots of wind-powered electricity, should we be using it for making electricity into our house? Should we be using that for making hydrogen to power vehicles or to store for the winter fuel? Or should we be using that to regenerate materials to capture from air? And I'll argue we should probably do all of those, because the mission is not to develop any one technology. The mission is to decrease the CO2 emissions to atmosphere and to recover CO2 emissions from atmosphere if we can. And so you've got to use whatever technologies come to hand.
Very well put. The next question also touches on technologies. Moston, good to have you with us. Do you want to?
Yeah, thanks. So it's around cost reductions, and when we think of CCS, it's, we think of large bespoke engineering projects, but the experience from renewables is that cost reduction, as well as being a function of deployment, is also thanks to them being made in factories. And so the question is, are there any carbon dioxide removal technologies that are trying to make use of factory-based production?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question as well. And this is where I think there's a difference of philosophy and design between civil and mechanical process chemical engineers and the rest of us. Because it is absolutely clear, of course, that if you've got a heat-based or a thermally based process, then scaling up and making a bigger one makes that more efficient because you lose less heat through the surface area. You can make that maybe 2%, 5%, maybe more greater efficiency by having a big one. Of course, the counter argument is that if it's so expensive that you only build a big one every 10 years, that doesn't get us to where we need to be. So I'm actually a fan of modular build of lots and lots of ones which can be made in factories and can be made very quickly and very reliably. And so you've got very good quality control, you've got very good price control, and all those other things. And that's how we've moved down the cost curve for mobile phones. So here I demonstrate a primary example of a mobile phone that's a living fossil. Okay, and you guys out there probably all have iPhone 10s or something scary like that. But the price of what you pay for that is trivial compared to the technology that's in it, and that's been done by building millions and millions of them. So there are no, to answer your question directly, I don't know of any air capture techniques which are doing that at the moment. Though of course I'm pretty sure there are some people will be seriously thinking about doing that. What was it? Factory-based production. Yeah, I think that, and factory-based production, in my opinion, is the way to do this fast, quickly, and reproducibly. And we can I know it's an easy victim, but if I compare building nuclear power plants with anything else, then nuclear power plants tend to suffer from being totally one of a kind. So they're notorious as being the only energy technology which has gone up in price persistently since they were first invented. And that's because they're bespoke built, but it's also because the safety standards have got a lot more onerous, and et cetera, et cetera. But I am interested in the proposition that Rolls-Royce could build simple modular reactors and deliver them on a truck, and they would be reliable and work for 10 years, and then the reactor guy would come and swap it for a new one. So, and I've no idea if that's going to be technologically feasible, but in principle, as an argument for making reliable, low-cost energy, which is again what we need to do, that seems at least worth thinking about.
Very interesting analogy. Our next question is from Sophia. In fact, you had two questions. They both got thumbs up. So do you want to put to Stuart?
Hi, sure. So I can start with the one. Thank you for your talk. I can start with the one that got more votes. So given that you've already told us that the infrastructure needed to develop the storage capacities for CCS to work at scale is really considerable. And also, if we think about it from the perspective of the market and within that framework, you need to make it profitable. How does this then fit in with ambitions to phase out fossil fuels and eventually switch to renewables? So it seems to me that if this is left to the market, the incentive would be to keep extracting fossil fuels for at least as long as it takes to justify the huge infrastructural investments. And this, of course, comes with other environmental consequences. Like, well, even if we fix the CO2 emissions, this extracting fossil fuels isn't without its additional environmental consequences. So I'm wondering how we fit this with the vision of switching eventually to renewables.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Sophia. Again, I'll comment there are several questions and I guess several belief systems embedded in the way you've asked this, and that's absolutely fine. So I suppose I go straight away to the concept of, are fossil fuels inherently bad? Because I can argue, or just I will sort of venture down an argument that by using fossil fuels right now, we each have the energy equivalent of having about 300 people working for us every day. Okay, so that's what makes us hugely rich and enables us to sit around in warm houses without having to go and dig turnips every day to get the next bit of food. So using energy has been and is incredibly beneficial. So I don't see anything wrong with energy. I suspect that we'll carry on using more and more energy. And the question is, are fossil fuels absolutely out of bounds for producing energy? And I think we're in a transition. And it's a question of how long the transition lasts. And we're clearly in a transition to using less or fewer fossil fuels. And that's absolutely fine by me, because we use most of our fossil fuel incredibly wastefully by burning it in static installations very ineffectively to make electricity, relatively ineffectively to send to our houses. And so the overall energy efficiency of that is maybe 30% or something hilarious like that once you've mined the fossil fuel or extracted it, taken it to where it's burned and then sent me the electricity. And we also use energy, fossil fuels quite ineffectively to heat my house with gas or cook my food. So again, we don't have to use very portable, transportable gas to do that. But I do think fossil fuels have advantages. So they're great feedstocks for plastics, pharmaceuticals, and all those other useful things we make in industrial complexes. So about 5% of our fossil fuel use is for those. And fossil fuels are still really great at storing energy, which is why we put them in tanks in cars and in aeroplanes and use them as portable energy stores. And so the question for me becomes not quite, are fossil fuels bad and need to be phased out, but can we use fossil fuels and not suffer the adverse consequences? And that's why I'm trying to describe ways of capturing carbon dioxide and then recapturing carbon dioxide to balance our usage of fossil fuel. So I would argue that I would very happy, emotionally happy, but also logically predict a greatly decreased use of fossil fuels and a greatly decreased extraction of fossil fuels into the future. And I think we're seeing the European oil companies like Shell and BP and Equinor now say that publicly, and they're going to start moving into becoming more energy companies. And it's really a question of, can they culturally handle that transition, or will they go extinct or not? And therefore they will be the obvious candidates to manage the infrastructure. So if we want to use some fossil fuels and have some way of disposing of the CO2, whether it's from carbon capture or from air capture, we need some infrastructure to send that through, some pipelines and some boreholes. And like it or not, that those oil companies are the groups of organizations which are absolutely accustomed to designing and building and costing and operating effectively and safely those pipelines and boreholes. So that I'll argue we should regard oil companies as potentially our friends, but we're wanting oil companies to pivot into a very different way of behaving and to pivot into a way of using their skills for sustainable energy rather than extractive energy.
Excellent. Talking of how to pivot them, Gavin, I hadn't spotted you had 2 questions as well. I'm going to move. Is
that okay for Sophia? Hopefully that's okay for Sophia. She doesn't come back immediately and ranted at me. But
Sophia,
anyway, right, Gavin.
Sorry, should I ask my second question, or should I let someone else?
If you want to ask it now, and then we'll take turns. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, just thank you for that. I guess I still don't see how this framework prevents fossil fuel companies from not doing exactly what they're telling us they're doing, because we have a long history of that. And this next question is related to it. So I do definitely think that shifting responsibility from consumers to polluters seems like the way to go. And I see how this framework you've described, and also Miles as described in his presentations, would work, for instance, in the UK. But what do we do with the companies that are based in countries with less stringent environmental regulations,
Sure. Yep.
or less resources to invest in CCS capacities, or maybe even both? So I'm a climate physicist, and I think about emissions globally. They matter for climate change in the end. So yeah, it seems like companies could still go to expanding markets where they can sell cheap fossil fuels without CCS and keep doing that for as long as they can.
Yep. So I would absolutely expect all these companies to behave as badly as possible. So we have to be a bit smarter than that. And obviously it's really difficult to be smarter than these companies because their job is to make money. And they've got lots of very smart people trying to make money. But clearly, if we put a carbon storage obligation in the UK, then they will try and move sales of fossil fuels out of the UK to build production to sell their fossil fuels elsewhere to any country which wants to do that. So it's quite possible that we may end up with a situation that I've got a pair of training shoes which has been manufactured in the UK for £100, and a quite possible, pretty much identical pair of training shoes has been manufactured elsewhere in the world with no carbon take back for £50, and that clearly won't work. So we're going to have a many decades long disruption between the carbon content of UK products and the carbon content of imported products. And so we have to put in place a way of managing that. And that conversation's been going around for a few years, and as I think is now resulting in the European Union, who still exist out there. The European Union is seriously now working out a border tariff adjustment or carbon border adjustment or some phrase like that. I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's for exactly that, to make an environmental adjustment, an environmental levy at the border for goods or services which try to come in to Europe as a trading bloc, which have basically undercut Europe's stringent environmental rules by trying to produce stuff more cheaply around the world with no environmental stipulations. So by starting off on the carbon border, by starting off on the carbon take-back obligation, you would apply that first of all to hydrocarbons produced in the UK borders. You would then apply that to imported hydrocarbons, which are imported as oil, gas or coal, and that's straightforward. And eventually, which is the calculations are already most of the way there, eventually you would be implying that to the embedded emissions of imported products. So we're already measuring embedded emissions in many things. So I think it is possible to do that in all those sectors. But of course, there are many pitfalls, and I'm going to imagine that lots of companies will try and play tricks. But if we're talking about compulsion or mandates for making companies behave well. We can't just leave it to, and this is again a big political economy divide, I suppose, that I believe that these companies are not capable of totally behaving well. They might want to in some respects, but there's so many pressures that they can't always behave well. So that actually it's simpler for companies if you create a tough rule, and that's a tough rule, and they know they've got to work to that, and everybody knows exactly where they are.
Very good. Yeah, I also wonder how we validate that, this CO2 is stored properly, but let's move through the questions.
Yeah, well, again, there are international organizations who can do that same way. DNV, for example, is a Norwegian organization that goes around inspecting shipping or standards or whatever, same as we have British standards for stuff, and we can inspect those. We have a storage standard.
Very good. In that case, yeah, shall we go back to in order? Next is Gavin again.
Righty-ho.
Hello again.
Hi, Gavin.
One of the things I liked about your talk, Stuart, you started off with this sort of, we need to do more than CCS, but CCS has a place. So my question takes us back to the renewables and the energy efficiency and the hydrogen. Have you thought at all about what might be a realistic or possible split of, I'm going to call it effort, but maybe investment, between those four broad things that you talked about: energy efficiency, renewables, other vectors like hydrogen, and CCS?
Right. Well, you need I'm going to say you need all of those.
But do you need equal amounts of effort for all of them? I suppose is my question.
Yeah, but I'm just going to try and think my way through what effort might mean. So that effort on efficiency, let's say, I'm always amazed by how much more efficiency we could be. So the effort on efficiency could be as simple as changing my light bulb for an LED light bulb. And that sounds so simple, but it took us something like 10 or 15 years to roll that through the UK. I'm sure Nick Eyre will be able to correct me on all the facts later, but by doing that at a mass scale across the UK, then that's had a really quite material effect on reducing our energy demand. So efficiency could also involve insulating your house, putting in double glazing, insulation underneath the floor, etc. So all these get progressively more difficult, which is why people don't do them, because they always involve disruption. But compared to other actions, they are by far the most energy effective and cost effective in my understanding. As you move through, then the chain of energy efficiency, fuel switching is really quite easy. So we've seen lots of organizations do that quite often. It can be done by keeping the same hot water system, but by just switching out your oil boiler and putting in a gas boiler, for example, at its simplest example. So that again is relatively straightforward to do, but people don't just go out and do that because they've watched it on the news. They do that when their old boiler becomes decrepit and defunct and needs replacing. So when you buy a new item of hardware in a house, you tend to buy the AAA rated washing machine rather than the F rated washing machine. So over a period of the life cycle of the equipment, which might be 10 years for washing machines or 20 years for cars or 200 years for houses, then there's a gradual and progressive improvement. Okay, so this happens gradually, but the most difficult things to do are building specific large-scale equipment, which has to be paid for, and that's why the carbon capture and storage bit, and that's why the direct air capture bits have been often talked about, seldom spotted, and still are existing as unicorns somewhere out there in the forest, because it's going to need a proper market-based system, and in the sense of somebody's going to be able to invest money and then get their money back by market. it's going to need a proper system where people can reliably invest, build these things, and then make a profit, or at least not make a loss out of building and operating those to benefit the rest of us. And so at the moment, governments haven't really had the courage to pluck up and even keep the fuel duty escalator, let's say, which was supposed to increase the price of petrol and diesel through the UK, but very rapidly got dumped as soon as it became a little bit politically difficult. So all these actions can be brought in by governments and then abandoned, and that's the problem. And that's why I'm trying to pose carbon take-back obligation as an action which, you know, a bit like the carbon budgets we've got now, has to be laid out for several years ahead. And we argue about that and discuss that 5, 10 or 15 years before we need to enact it. So there's a clear pathway for companies to know what the demand and the ask is, and there's a clear arrival destination at zero or net zero in 2050.
Very good. Well, while you were answering that, I pictured in my mind the Hepburn abatement curve that you showed to merge with the McKinsey curve into sort of one complicated structure.
Well, yeah, they're different parts of the same coin or same portrait in a way.
Right, we're on to Nick.
Are we, or Mostyn? Have we done Mostyn?
Oh, we have Mostyn.
Oh no, we've done Mostyn, I think. Haven't we done Mostyn? We did a question like that before. So yeah, maybe it is I'm Nick.
Next on the list.
You can't avoid Nick. Here he is.
Oh, I wasn't trying to avoid Nick, but I'm still.
So I just wanted to, I wanted to get you a bit more thoughts on why you think an obligation is the right way forward, because the people who can do carbon capture in the places where they're likely to need it, which might be cement kilns and blast furnaces, obviously aren't the people who've extracted the fossil fuel in the first place. And as I said on the chat, with lots of experience of these sort of obligation systems, therefore have to be tradable in both renewables and energy efficiency. And I think the current trend is away from them towards auctions or other fixed price variable quantity mechanisms, as opposed to the fixed quantity variable price mechanism as an obligation. So I just sort of wondered why you thought an obligation was better than some sort of auction system.
Well, how the obligation is delivered is in some ways immaterial to me, because I'm a university person and I don't deal in money. But by saying that, I mean that if you as an oil importer have 10 million tons of obligations to store, so you have to buy that on the market. You have to find somebody who can store 10 million tons on your behalf. And you then may go shopping and find two or three people who can store 10 million tons, and then there's a price competition. So that will tend to drive, I would presume, tend to drive the price down. So I've seen this more as not as an auction, but as a liquidity in the market. So I have options and competition between 2 or 3 storage providers who are competing on price and reliability, and can I do it by the time you need it?
I guess that's what I'm saying. If you take the example of energy efficiency obligations, we know the way they've worked out is that, you know, the energy suppliers have basically said, well, if you do a cavity wall insulation, we'll give you 200 quid. I mean, it's not a very, and that's because each of them have got separate schemes. If you actually amalgamated it as you would with a price-based system, I think you get a much better deal.
So what's wrong with being given £200 for fitting energy efficiency on my house then?
Nothing for you, but as the price as you pointed out, in all these things, the price gets smeared, the cost gets smeared over all other energy consumers. So if we could have got people to do it for 100 quid, it would have been better.
Yeah, but if we have an emissions-based trading scheme, then as you go towards beyond 30% emissions reduction, let's say, then certificates start becoming scarce. So paying to pollute becomes more expensive. So you then end up with a chromatography of wealth, whereby trillionaires in executive debt jets carry on paying, whereas poor people can't pay. So I'm not sure. I don't see how the emissions trading actually achieves the net zero objective. Because
I'm not arguing in favour of emissions trading.
Right, okay.
I mean, I agree with you that we need to do things. We need to do efficiency renewables and maybe a bit of CCS even.
Right.
And that we should support those. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fine. So but I'm still thinking that what the concept is trying to do is avoid putting a government price on that, because the more government guesses on price, the wronger it gets, and the more it just gets shafted by scheming traders outmaneuvering the government all the time, because they'll either buy futures or shorts or whatever it takes to game the market. So if there are any traders making big money out of the market, you've probably failed somewhere.
Nick is great talk anyway, Stuart. Really loved it.
Good. Who's next? Nick Jelly. Nick, how are you?
Unmute. Thanks for your talk. It's very interesting indeed. This question is just about the fact that it hasn't got going yet, as you rightly pointed out, CCS. And do you think a way that CCS might drive down its costs is by concentrating just on one mechanism, like steam reforming of methane, which you mentioned? And for the UK, say, where, as you say, we've got good storage, this might be a good plan, not trying to do, I don't see the actual very strong argument for trying to do anything to do with power. It looks like renewables are coming down in price so fast that with your lead time of 5 years, it will be not a good guess, not a good bet. But obviously in industry, you do need heat, and hydrogen looks like quite an attractive proposition.
Nick is doing the daring thing of picking winners.
Right, yep, okay, so I'll agree with a lot of what you just said, in that I think it would be, I think it's strange to think about investing on building fossil fuel power plants when we might be able to get through this now to a sustainable existence with renewable power and renewable generation of various different types. Maybe even some modular nuclear, don't know, but I don't see any reason to waste and have the difficulty of burning fossil fuels and capture CO2 emissions from those, provided we can store enough energy on the system, enough energy for heat and for electricity. And so hydrogen can be stored. And one of the things we, in our research group at Edinburgh, are working on is how to store hydrogen at very, very large scale, you know, a month's worth of UK hydrogen. And so I think it's quite, moving to hydrogen seems to have many advantages to me. And I think the storage system is one of the very strong advantages, because storage of electricity clearly is really very difficult. So you can store with batteries and you can store with pump storage. There's a new cryogenic store being built and proposed in Manchester, but all these are tiny by comparison with the amount of energy you need to store in our energy system. So they've got a huge way to go, factor, you know, 100,000 out, 100,000 shortfall, multiplication times. So making and manufacturing hydrogen seems very plausible. Then you can get involved in an argument or a conversation about green hydrogen made by wind power or blue hydrogen made by splitting methane and storing CO2. I'm entirely agnostic about that at the moment, because the mission is not to produce hydrogen. The mission is to decarbonize. And if you can produce hydrogen and decarbonize the gas combustion, that's the important item. So that I suspect that what will happen is we can produce blue hydrogen now by splitting methane with existing equipment. So in the plans for those industrial sites around the UK that I've seen, then I think Merseyside and Humberside and probably Teesside are all trying to produce, oh no, South Wales as well, I think, are trying to produce hydrogen and decarbonising by fuel switching from hydrocarbons into pure hydrogen and taking away the CO2 to store. That then has the advantage, as you quite correctly point out, and the way I would describe as providing an extra CO2 flux to get the business of starting up that CO2 capture, transport and storage pipeline, to get that business up and started, because once it's started, then people believe in it. But getting these things started for the first time is difficult. So you can start that off with the CO2 derived from methane splitting, and as that develops, as the use of hydrogen develops, we will still be building windmills around the UK. So I would expect to see a gradual transition from hydrogen split from methane into totally green hydrogen by the time we get to mid-century or thereabouts, as more and more wind power and solar power and tide power comes onto the system.
Thank you very much. I agree. I think green hydrogen is coming down in price quite fast as well.
There are some bold claims being made, yeah, but I haven't seen one work yet. But you know, but with the dream follows reality eventually.
Very good. Next, we've got Mirte. Mirte has a set of 3 questions for you, and I think partially you've at least answered some of them. Mirte, have you got a favourite left?
Yeah, just testing. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
I'm not sure my internet is good. Okay, thank you so much. So I study public policy in Oxford. So I have a few questions about the carbon take-back obligation kind of policy design. I think you answered mostly the first one. How do you make sure that costs aren't fully passed to consumers? And I would also wonder, how do you prevent companies using the certificates for nature-based solutions so that they don't invest in the wrong thing? And thirdly, what would be kind of the enforcement mechanism? How do you prevent like a lot of money having to be spent to enforce the system? And I was in a working group for a carbon take-back obligation in the Netherlands, so I'm very interested in the policy. I just wonder what the kind of details would be in working it out. Thank you so much.
Okay, Mirte, thank you. Yeah, and just for everybody else, then the Netherlands is having, as far as I understand it, a pretty serious conversation about enacting the carbon take-back obligation, which is interesting because the energy systems of Netherlands and the UK are sort of comparable in some ways, much more comparable than us and India. Anyway, let's get onto this. So companies don't pass costs onto consumers? Well, I think the fossil fuel companies will pass the costs onto consumers, but the costs won't be itemized as a thing. It'll just be in the cost of the raw material, so that for 1 kilowatt of gas energy, you pay 5p just now, and 1 kilowatt of gas electricity with carbon take-back, i.e. hydrogen with CO2 disposal, then you might pay 7p. So those sort of costs will be transmitted down. But I think those costs, you know, the calculations and the modelling which has been done so far seems to indicate that those costs are much less once they're smeared out at wholesale price across everybody, rather than just dumped on a particular victim like an electricity customer or another victim like a car owner. Okay, so how do you prevent companies using certificates for nature-based solutions? Well, that I would personally decide against nature-based solutions, not because they're nature-based trees. Oh well, let's decide what we're talking about. Yeah, I would suggest that any solution which has the relevant timescale and can be validated and inspected is eligible for certification. So that if you can do trees which last 10,000 years, then you'll get a certificate, but you're not going to have to quite a lot of convincing to tell me they're not going to burn down. If you can convince me that you're going to grind up rock dust and spread that on fields, and that will absorb CO2 by natural weathering, and that's faster weathering, then that to me is a sort of boundary between nature-based and enhanced weathering. So you don't have clear divisions between these, even though academics might like to make them clear divisions, but you definitely do have a certificate eligibility for if you put liquid CO2 underground into porous rock, because we can image, by using oil and gas techniques, you can image that underground by sending sound waves down, reflecting off those layers of carbon dioxide. And so you can image a quantity of carbon dioxide the size of a large living room. For Nick Ayre's office there, which we saw earlier on, we could image that sort of size underground. So you can track that and verify that quite authentically. and that can be done by independent companies as being effectively the paid police, and that's actually quite a cheap way of remote sensing. Does that imply high enforcement costs? I think actually the enforcement costs of this would be lower than everything else, because if you're going to, again, I'm going to take the example of trees, and it's not because I don't like trees, I really like trees, but how do we know if the trees have been planted, the trees grow, if the trees have been accidentally blighted by drought, or if after 45 years half the forest burns down in a week? You know, the enforcement and validation costs of trees are just more logistically difficult to me.
Very interesting. You happy, Mirte?
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Really interesting.
Fantastic. There's various thank yous in the chat as well for you, Stuart. And our final question from Pete Dobson about manufacturing. Hello, Pete.
Hi, thank you, Stuart. I've always been a skeptic about this, but I think you've converted me tonight, so thank you.
Good.
My question, though, is one really about who's going to make all this stuff, who's going to manufacture it. I don't want to see us importing all this from China and Germany and elsewhere. I want to be there making it so that we're exporting it to the rest of the world. So my question is a simple one. Do you see any interest in British companies making this stuff?
Yeah, well, that is a key question, and it's been a serial failure of serial governments and serial industrialists to not take these opportunities to manufacture windmills, to manufacture offshore windmills, or to manufacture spare parts for nuclear plant. You know, because we built the first commercial nuclear plant in the world in 1955 or whatever it was. When I was a student in Glasgow in the late 1970s, there was an engineering company called Howdens trying to convert from shipbuilding to making windmills. So they tooled up to make the windmills, but nobody wanted them. So because they were 15 years, 20 years ahead of their time, they went broke on that. So now we truck in the windmills from Vestas or whoever in Denmark. So we can and should be deliberately planning to have what they call in the jargon supply chains of manufacture in the UK, because, you know, buying the thing and installing it is one item, and then doing the maintenance on it is another item, and then being able to design it and flog it and build it in somebody else's country or somewhere else is yet another item. And there are three ways we should be trying to have a much more integrated way of making money and employing good quality, resilient, high technology jobs in the UK. So that if there is any silver lining to Brexit, which I doubt, then that sort of endeavour could be one of the outcomes. And I guess that is part of one of the outcomes of this Industry Strategy Challenge Fund and clean growth I talked about earlier on, is that it is mandatory to write some script about that type of supply chain at the end of each funding application. But of course, writing it and actually making sure it happens and stays there are two different things. But so I'm fully in support of the UK government for currently trying to develop that supply chain and manufacture in the UK.
Thank you.
And Pete, you'll be delighted to hear the first cohort of our Energy Systems MSc students at Oxford finished this summer, and two of them started a startup company to do air capture. So it is happening.
They're brave.
Yes, they are. They are very brave, I tell you.
Yeah.
No,
that's also a culture we need to have, isn't it, of trying things out.
Yeah.
Never before have we come so close to 6 o'clock. I mean, the session is booked till 6. Stuart, you've really held your audience captive. And Bing pleads whether he may also ask another question. Stuart, are you happy for one more?
Yeah, I'm happy. That's good. Go ahead, Bing.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Bing. I'm a new lecturer at the University of Surrey in environmental engineering.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. So my question is more about the biotechnology part, because my background is microbiology. So I noticed that you said the cost for microalgae based capture is quite high, but actually I'm looking at a lot of more technologies like capturing the carbon dioxide to produce single cell proteins or to produce value added products. So how do you see this fit into the UK either research or the market?
Okay. So I think the graph where we displayed microalgae, you'll have to write into Cameron Hepburn to ask him how he got that particular figure. So that's his diagram. I've not recalculated that, but I could imagine that it's a relatively high cost because you need equipment, tanks or whatever built. You need light sources, you may need heating, you need a nutrient supply. All those sorts of things seem to occur, but you know, obviously I don't know what you do in particular, but I've seen people try to develop micronutrient algae in Scotland to feed salmon, for example, because otherwise a lot of that food is imported. So I think, yeah, so developing microalgae can work. It can be a value-added product. But again, I'm going to draw the distinction between the utilization of CO2 in making a value-added product for money, and that's fine. But we should then realize that that's making the value-added to make a commercial business, but that's not storing the carbon dioxide for any geologically long period of time. It might store the carbon dioxide for days, weeks, years, a century, but not for the 10,000 years we need for the Earth to return into its environmental balance. So I'm just going to draw that distinction between the two types of storage activity and utilization or added value activity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That takes us to the end of all the questions we've had. That's been a fantastic discussion, as also confirmed by Valpi here. Superb talk, superb discussion. So that's a